We can speak to Alan Dershowitz, who is a Harvard University Law Professor Emeritus and former attorney to President Trump. Professor Dershowitz, I imagine you've got some pretty strong opinions, given that you have a very long association with Harvard University. But let me start by asking you, what's your understanding of how it's come to this point between Harvard University and the Trump administration?
Well, both sides have overreacted and refused to come to the bargaining table. Obviously, this thing should be and can be resolved through negotiation. The Trump administration has gone much, much too far in trying to terminate all visas. Why should visas be terminated from scientists, people who might help us cure cancer or do other good things for humanity? And why should a visa, for example, be turned down from a student from Israel or a Jewish student from Great Britain? The general proposal is much, much too broad. On the other hand, legally, Trump is going to win, for better or worse. The government has the right to determine who comes into the country and who doesn't. Every country in the world has restrictions on who can come in and who can't. When we have people apply for green cards or visas, we generally ask them about their views. So this is not a First Amendment issue. Nobody's depriving anybody of their First Amendment rights to speak. They are being deprived of their non-right to come into the country. So this thing should be negotiated. We should have targeted visa denials. That is, visa denials for students who are going to be disruptive, who are going to harass other students, who are preventing other students from coming to class, who are disrupting classes. But we shouldn't have broad denials of all visas to all foreign students. That just goes much too far.
Right. I mean, 27% of students at Harvard are in the category of being international students. At least that's the latest number I saw. I mean, surely out of that 27%, we're talking about a very small percentage of people that would fall into your definition of disruptive or harassing other students.
Yeah, probably a larger percentage would fall into the category of people that the United States could properly exclude for one reason or another legally. But I agree with you that the vast majority of foreign students, and I've taught thousands of foreign students in my 60 years at Harvard, contribute enormously to diversity, enormously to the intellectual atmosphere of the school. I always loved to have foreign students in my class. I taught, law for years and would always call on foreign students to give a comparative basis to American law, and that enriched the classes enormously. So I think it goes much too far to put the brake on all foreign students.
How much do you think this is about substance, and how much of this is about optics and playing up to that, or fulfilling that pledge and that electoral promise of a hardline stance on immigration?
It's impossible to separate the two. There is a serious problem at Harvard. Harvard has become an institution of the hard left. Its faculty is very, very left-wing. Its student body is very left-wing. And we don't have a kind of intellectual diversity that would make the school an even better place. But then, of course, politics plays into it too, because the average voter hates Harvard. $53 billion endowment. Why are they getting federal funds? So it's a no-lose proposition for the administration politically. But I think both Harvard are hurt and the United States is hurt by having too broad an application of these untargeted punishments. So we ought to target them and make sure that they're directed only at people who are causing the problems, legitimate, real problems. When students are prevented from going to class, when two students prevented an Israeli student from moving on the campus and threatened them and harassed them, and then both of them got rewarded, one by being the class marshal at Harvard Law School's graduation ceremony for the Divinity School, and the other getting a $65,000 scholarship. These are students who should have been disciplined. They weren't exercising a First Amendment right. They were blocking somebody from exercising their First Amendment right, and they were rewarded. So, there is a problem at Harvard, but it shouldn't overreact to the problem by punishing innocent people.
Right, and Professor Dershowitz, I mean, how is it come to this point? How and why did Harvard suddenly lurch to the left? To what would you attribute that?
Oh, it's not sudden. I came to Harvard in 1964. It was a very conservative institution at the time. And over time, starting with the Vietnam War, the faculty moved leftward. And then they started appointing lots of administrators. You know, when I came to Harvard, there were faculty and there were students, and there were a small number of administrators. Now there are an enormous number of administrators. I think they outnumber the faculty, and many of them are hard left people. And so these are people who hate America. These are people who hate Christianity. These are people who hate Judeo-Christian, Abrahamic religions. They hate religion in general. There's a lot of that at Harvard. There's a lot of the Democratic Socialists of America who are an anarchistic organization. But all universities have that. Columbia is worse. NYU has it. Harvard is the most famous university in the world. So inevitably, it's going to be the target of any punitive actions.
Right, and you know, we tend to think of universities as being places where students, you know, go through various phases in their, you know, political belief system, and they experiment with different political beliefs, and it's part of their rite of passage of growing up. And you know, you mentioned the Vietnam War protests, which are sort of synonymous with university life in the United States, in the minds of people around the world. Yep. But what you're saying is you don't have an issue with students taking to the streets and waving banners. You've got an issue with perhaps the way things were handled more specifically by the university. Is that what it boils down to?
I don't have any problem with students waving banners. I've defended students who've waved banners. I defended Palestinian students at Harvard who could not fly the flag, the Palestinian flag, when Yasser Arafat died. I don't mix my politics with my constitutional law. No problem about waving banners. There is a problem about blocking access to classes. There is a problem about kidnapping janitors, as was done at Columbia. And I represented a lot of protesters during the Vietnam War, but some of them ultimately became violent murderers. Kathy Boudin became a murderer. The Weathermen started planting bombs. And what we saw the other day when this killer murdered two people from the Israeli embassy, I predicted that might happen when I saw the kind of violence that was accompanying some of the anti-Israel demonstrations on campus. So I think there's a legitimate concern that violent protests can turn into even more violent killings, as occurred in the District of Columbia.
You say that a lot of universities in the United States are quite left-leaning. Have you seen and heard messages of solidarity for Harvard coming from other institutions across the US? Is that something that's being played out in the media there?
Yeah, it's because the Trump administration has overreacted. And that, indeed, there was an article in the paper the other day that Harvard is coming together more than ever before, because whatever side you're on the Israel issue and on liberal conservative issues, you don't want to see Harvard destroyed. And so a lot of conservative professors or pro-Israel professors are now siding with Harvard because they don't want to side with the Trump administration. I think that's true of universities around the country. They're supporting Harvard not because they think Harvard did everything perfectly right, but because as between Harvard and the Trump administration, they want to make sure that Harvard preserves its status as a great institution of learning and as a great research center where cures for all kinds of diseases may very well be developed over the years and could be stopped by some of the defunding that's going on now, because that also is not targeted. Instead of defunding the schools or the programs that have perpetrated anti-Semitism, anti-Americanism, they have broadly defunded everything, and that will stop important research from going forward. So the bottom line generally is, if you're going to have sanctions against the university, make them targeted, make them focus on the evildoers, not on the innocent people who are doing good research and promoting proper educational policies.
Right, and you know, there are probably kids all over the world trying to find out whether or not they're going to study in the United States or not, queuing up outside embassies. Probably in those embassies, there's a degree of confusion as to what visas can be issued and which cannot be issued. But do you think all of this and this whole debate and this perception that, you know, centers of academic excellence are being somehow, they're coming under attack from the very top in the United States? I mean, do you think the brand US as a destination to study abroad risks being damaged and therefore losing out to other countries where people might think, well, it's too risky to study in America. I want to go and study in China or in India or indeed anywhere else?
A, there's no question that's happening. But B, I think most Americans would probably say that too many foreigners are studying at American universities because every spot taken by a foreigner is a spot taken away from an American. So when you have an administration that's America first, and you have an attitude by many Americans, as you have in every country in the world, that their country comes first, you do see some sympathy for at least cutting back on the number of foreign students. When I started teaching at Harvard, there were handfuls of foreign students, and today it's up to, according to some statistics, 27%, other statistics, 33%. Don't know where the truth lies, but it's a very, very, very substantial increase. And some of it is on merit. Some of it is on for financial reasons. And so we're seeing a combination of things. Number one, a lot of Americans think there are too many foreign students in American schools. And number two, a lot of Americans think that too many of those students, although it's a small percentage, are creating the kind of disruptions that are hurting American universities. So it's a perfect storm that's hurting foreign students in different ways.
When you hear the Homeland Security Secretary, Kristi Noem, talking about Harvard fostering violence, anti-Semitism, and coordinating with the Chinese Communist Party, do you agree with all of what she's saying or just a fraction of it?
I've never heard about the Communist parties. I never met anybody who was associated with the Chinese Communist Party in my 60 years.
We can rule that one out. We can rule that one out then.
I think so. There is one organization on campus and all over the country. It's called Code Pink, which has had an affiliation with the Chinese Communist Party, but they're a tiny, largely uninfluential country. I don't think that's a real problem. I think the real problem is both homegrown and foreign students who see disruption as a proper way of protesting what's going on in Gaza and other places. And political protests are fine. They're part of the American Constitution. But violent protests that don't permit students to go to class and that discriminate based on religion or race are not acceptable. And that's why it's important to have targeted responses.
What does Harvard have to do, in your opinion? What would you like to see a school with which you have a long and presumably affectionate attachment? What do they need to do to bring about a reset and a rethink on the part of the Trump administration and put this whole saga to bed?
Two things. First, they have to sit down and offer to negotiate and say that we're prepared to make certain compromises. Then they ought to offer compromises. First, greater emphasis on meritocracy, hiring faculty and admitting students based on their own merit, not on the basis of racial and other criteria, gender criteria. Second, do away with teaching concepts like intersectionality and DEI and critical race theory, which have fostered an atmosphere in the Harvard campus of bigotry and anti-Semitism. There's a lot of things Harvard could do, and the president of Harvard is anxious to do it. He would like to see Harvard become a place where students get along better and where we have more ideological diversity. That's the key, ideological diversity. If 97% of the Harvard faculty are to the left and they use their politics in the classroom, there's something very wrong. I don't care what people's politics are. I don't care what my doctor's politics are, as long as he or she doesn't allow it to influence the way I get treated. The same thing with teaching. For 60 years at Harvard, I never expressed a personal view in my classroom. Students had no idea whether I was pro-Israel, pro-Palestinian, whether I was a Republican or a Democrat. I just wouldn't allow my own personal views ever to enter into classroom discussions, because my job was to teach them not what to think, but how to think critically, how to become better conservatives if they were conservative, better liberals if they were liberals. And I think we have to see a return to that kind of teaching if we're going to see an end to this dispute between government and universities.
Okay, and just lastly, I mean, given, an institution like the Harvard Law School is so prestigious, and of course you know it better than anyone else probably on earth, given that the professors there are the very professors who, in many cases, likely taught the top judges across the United States or gave some legal instruction to them at some stage in their careers. Who do you see coming out on top in all of this if, this legal battle rumbles on? Is it going to be Team Harvard and its band of law professors who are presumably very much on board with, well, perhaps they're not, but correct me if I'm wrong, who are perhaps on board with Harvard's cause? Or do you see the Trump administration coming out on top in all of this?
It depends on whether you think about short-term or long-term. Short-term, Trump wins. He's going to get the Supreme Court, to support almost all of his innovations, including visa restrictions and including restrictions on funding. Long-term, Harvard wins. Harvard is older than the United States. It will endure beyond any particular administration, but it will be wounded. And the way to prevent that wound from spreading is for Harvard to take action internally to present its student body with a far more diverse faculty and a far more diverse administration. And I think Harvard is trying hard to do that. That's a long-term effort. It will not happen during the Trump administration. So Trump will win while he's in office, and that's what he obviously is concerned about. But ultimately, Harvard will prevail.
Okay, we're going to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for your time. Really appreciate it. Alan Dershowitz, Harvard University Law Professor Emeritus and former attorney to President Trump. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.